President of the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association.
Welcome. I'm John Lobbs, President of the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association. Wisconsin's radio and television broadcasters are pleased to be able to host this debate as a public service to the people of Wisconsin. The debate will be heard and seen in virtually every corner of the state, the most widely broadcast political event in Wisconsin history. In the traditional spirit of service to their communities, the association's radio and television members hope that the airing of this debate will aid the people of Wisconsin as they approach their duty of electing Wisconsin's next governor on November 7th. The debate will engage the two major candidates for governor of Wisconsin in 1990, Democratic candidate Tom Loftus and Republican candidate Tommy G. Thompson. Our debate format is broken into three parts. First, each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. Second, the opening statements will be followed by a series of questions posed by three broadcast journalists. Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to respond to each question. The responses will be followed by rebuttals from each candidate, limited to 30 seconds. Finally, at the close of the questioning period, each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to make a closing statement. Our panelists include Dave Iverson, executive news producer and anchor for the Wisconsin Public Television Network; Patty Lowe, evening news anchor and reporter for WKOW-TV in Madison; and John Scherer, news director for radio stations WMYM-AM and WWMH-FM in Minocqua. The order of opening and closing statements and the order of response for the questions has been decided earlier through a flip of the coin. Mr. Loftus will begin with an opening statement.
Well, first I want to thank the organizers of this event. And I want to say what an honor it has been to serve as the Speaker of the House. I have served in that position for 8 years. That's longer than anyone else in Wisconsin's history. I love this state, and I'm truly a son of Wisconsin. My grandparents were immigrants who came from Norway to Stoughton. I grew up in Sun Prairie and went to college at Whitewater. And I grew up believing that Wisconsin was a state where you could be in politics and you wouldn't have to apologize for it, that it was an honorable profession. It's an honor for me to be a candidate for governor. And people ask, why leave the powerful position of Speaker to take on an underdog challenge for governor? And I say, to lead. My wife Barbara and I have 2 young sons. We must invest in our children's education. But in this state, that means getting a handle on the property tax because it holds back progress, especially in education. We have to leave our children a clean environment, and I'm proud of my Clean 16 voting record. 20 years ago, Barbara and I participated in the first Earth Day, and I want to make the decade of the 90s the next environmental decade. In this next hour, I hope to tell you about my ideas, my issues, and my dreams for this state, and tell you what type of state I want to leave our children. That's what this election is all about.
Mr. Thompson, your opening statement.
Thank you very much. I want to thank WBA, all those individuals here. I want to thank those individuals who are watching us this evening. I want to thank you for allowing me to be your governor for the last 4 years. You're my partners. You and I have come a long way in the last 4 years. We've been able to take a state that was in a state of crisis. We've been able to change it. We've been able to make Wisconsin the envy of the nation. We've been able to change the malaise, the kind of economic doldrums that Wisconsin was in, into one that's now created more than 225,000 jobs. More people are working now in the state of Wisconsin than ever before in our history. Our unemployment was around 7% when I came in. It's around 4% now. Environment. We've been able to purchase the Big Chip and the Turtle Flammel, the 2 largest recreational land purchases in the history of the state. Been able to preserve the lower Wisconsin, the upper Mississippi, start a new program to clean up the Great Lakes. Education. Aren't you proud that our high school graduates once again this year were #1 for those that graduate and took the ACT? I am. And I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, Wisconsin's on a roll. Grant Thornton says we moved up from 31st to 14th to 8th to #3. Kiplinger report says we're the leading state in the Midwest economically. We're number one in the environment, #1 in education. We're #1 in the enforcement of laws. I'm looking forward so much to the decade of the 90s because I believe the decade of the 90s can be the best decade we ever had, you and I. It's been an honor being your governor. Let's continue the partnership. Let's continue to grow and prosper, creating jobs, preserving the environment, improving education. And those 4 E's, ladies and gentlemen, spell excellence. And that's what Wisconsin's all about.
Thank you, gentlemen. Our first question will be directed to Mr. Loftus by John Scherer.
Good evening, gentlemen. If the state economy enters a recession, lowering the tax revenues, what programs will you consider trimming first in order to keep the budget in line?
Well, a respected group has projected a $500 million deficit for Wisconsin. There's a ironic situation where the state owes the phone company $100 million. But I think that's manageable without a tax increase. And we can do some things like cutting the promotional budgets of agencies. My welfare reform plan, which I will detail here tonight, I think will save some money. And we can stop new programs from starting and from enacting new expenditures. But I guess I disagree with the governor in one sense. He has predicted that there won't be a recession in Wisconsin for 4 years. I can't make that prediction. So we very well could have a deficit.
Mr. Thompson.
The Financial World magazine said that Wisconsin was one of the 8th best managed states financially. 4 years ago, when I was running as a candidate for governor at that time, the same question was asked. And I said, if I was elected governor, I'd be able to manage. I'd be able to keep the state of Wisconsin strong and be able to strengthen the programs and not have to raise taxes. 4 years, ladies and gentlemen, I've balanced the budget, reduced taxes, and increased the programs. I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, we will not have tax increases or program cuts if Tommy Thompson is reelected. I've got 4 years that I've been able to show the kind of leadership that we have in Wisconsin. And I also want to point out that today we're going to end this fiscal year stronger and better than anybody had imagined. $37 million more dollars coming in increased revenues. And we didn't spend as much money as the legislature budget is. We saved another $44 million. We're going to start out the next fiscal year with a balance of $175 million, ladies and gentlemen. And I ask you, don't you think we can get along with a surplus of $175 million? I know I can, and I can assure you that we're going to get along and do very well and improve the quality of life for all of our citizens in Wisconsin without tax increases, without program cuts, because we're optimistic. We've got a partnership that's building and growing every day in the state, and it's going to continue to grow into the decade of the 90s.
Mr. Loftus, your rebuttal.
Well, let's explore that question that the governor has brought up about tax increases. You know, and I know, that a tax has gone up in the last 4 years, and that's the property tax. It's gone up 40% on an average house in Wisconsin. That's a record. That is the problem that we have in this state, and that is what I plan to address. That's my priority as governor. I have a plan that will lower school property taxes, and I look forward to detailing it tonight.
Mr. Thompson.
I've been able to reduce income taxes, inheritance taxes, capital gains taxes, farm taxes, unemployment taxes in the last 4 years, ladies and gentlemen. And the property tax is the last one I've introduced in legislation every year that I've been governor. The legislature wouldn't take it up. But I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that if Tommy Thompson is reelected, we will get that one under control in the next 4 years.
The next question will be directed to Mr. Thompson by Patty Lowe.
Mr. Thompson, two independent polls, one by the Milwaukee Journal, the other by the University of Iowa, indicate that 65 to 70% of Wisconsin residents support a woman's right to choose on the issue of abortion. If it came across your desk as governor, would you sign right-to-life legislation knowing that two-thirds of Wisconsin residents did not share your position on this issue?
Patty, the abortion question is the most controversial, the most sensitive issue facing any of us in public office today. There will not be a bill like that that's passed in the legislature because the Roe v. Wade decision has not been overturned. The decision on abortion, the decision that's going to affect and that's going to have to be debated and is going to have to be considered by the next governor, is a decision on parental consent. That's the issue before the voters in Wisconsin. It's going to be the issue facing the next governor and the next legislature. I happen to support, like 80% of the women and population across the state, a strong parental consent piece of legislation. I'm a father and a husband. I have 2 children, 2 daughters, and I think it's my responsibility. I brought those individuals into this world, and during the most serious time of their life, if they were pregnant and had to discuss whether or not they were going to have an abortion, I think it's only fitting that they would come to me or to my wife, Sue Ann, and discuss that issue. I think it's only fair. I'm sorry that my opponent voted against the parental consent piece of legislation this past year. I happen to favor it. And that's the question on abortion facing all of us in this election.
Patty, would you repeat that question for Mr. Loftus?
Yes, Mr. Loftus, if right-to-life legislation came across your desk as governor, would you sign it?
Well, let me be quite honest and answer the question. I do not think abortion is a government decision. I believe it is a private decision, and I trust the women of Wisconsin. What's likely to happen is that over the next 4 years, the next governor is going to have on his desk a bill that will outlaw almost all abortions in Wisconsin. The governor has said he would sign such a bill. I will veto a bill. I think that the last people to make this decision are the men of the Wisconsin legislature. We are in a system of self-government, and there are certain freedoms involved in that system. And one of them is an individual has to have some rights to choose outside of government interference. And yes, I did vote against the parental consent bill. It was unrealistic. But I support a bill where one parent can give consent or the minor gets counseling. It's not every family where communication exists, and a law can't mandate that. There has to be options. I think my proposal on parental consent is more reasonable, represents a compromise, and is more realistic for the women and the families of this state.
Mr. Thompson.
A parental consent bill under Speaker Loftus would allow for Uncle Charlie to make that decision, a teacher or some outside counselor. I think that is a question that should be decided by the parents. The parents are the ones that brought those children into this world. The parents are the ones that have the biggest influence on those children and should have the opportunity to advise them on this very serious question. I don't want Uncle Charlie down the block to make that decision. I either want my wife, Sue Ann, or myself to help advise our 2 daughters if they became pregnant and needed an abortion. I think that is what is needed in the state of Wisconsin, and that's the issue that's going to be in front of the legislature next session, and that's the issue that the next governor is going to have to decide.
Mr. Loftus.
Well, the governor has not answered the question, and it's not a hard question to answer. If you know what you believe and you understand what the proper role of government is in such sensitive and private decisions. I've answered the question frankly and honestly, and it represents a position that I have held my whole time in the legislature. And I want the people of this state to know what I would do if I were elected and a bill to outlaw abortion came to my desk. I would veto it.
Next question by Mr. Iverson, addressed to Mr. Loftus.
Recently, a British newspaper carried an article. It was a rather grim account about a city that was struggling with the problems of drugs, crime, and despair. That city was the city of Milwaukee. As you both know, just yesterday, 5 more people died in the inner city of Milwaukee in a house fire. A house that was meant for 8, but which contained 24 residents. If you are elected governor, what will you do for the inner city residents of Milwaukee?
I think of these incidents and read the paper, and I think of my 9-year-old boy and my 3-year-old boy, and think of the agony that must exist in this area of Wisconsin. I would do several things, sensible things. 1, we need a new welfare system, one where you're better off working. 2, we need health insurance availability. 3, we need new laws against gang crimes. 4, the state has control of prisoners and people on probation and parole. They shouldn't be let back in our society if they still have a drug problem. But we have to direct the state's economic development efforts, housing efforts, and jobs to this area of Milwaukee. There is no excuse for being a drug user or a drug dealer, but then there's no excuse for the government not doing what's necessary to make the lives of these people better. I think we need jobs now. I have proposed 1,000 jobs like a Franklin Roosevelt CCC program, a Milwaukee business partnership for another 500 entry-level jobs. It's time to stop waiting for the crumbs to fall off the table, and it's time to start addressing these problems in a realistic way.
Mr. Iverson, would you repeat your question for Mr. Thompson?
Yes, Governor, the question is, given the problems that are currently before the city of Milwaukee, particularly the inner city, what will you do if you are reelected as governor to assist the inner city residents of this city?
We have already started. We don't have to wait till the next year. I was in Milwaukee this past week on Wednesday. I unveiled a new $10 million revenue bond program for new housing, so that 300 first-time home buyers are going to be able to own their own home under the Thompson administration. Last year, I proposed another $16 million expansion of housing, and we set up a housing zone so that the city of Milwaukee and the state of Wisconsin can enter into a partnership that's going to be able to improve the housing stock in the inner city. We also set up an enterprise zone to expand business, to attract businesses into the inner zone. And do you know something? We're almost ready to unveil a business that's going to be coming into the inner city that's going to create jobs. I also set up the Job Ride program, a Job Ride program that's going to allow for transportation to the inner city residents who are unemployed and allow them to get jobs in the suburbs where there's a lot of jobs going wanting because there aren't any employees. We also set up a incubator in the inner city, $500,000 to start new minority businesses in the north side, right here in this vocational school. It was my idea, and it's going well. We're also going to put in $500,000 to start a new incubator in the south side for Hispanics. The thing we have to do, ladies and gentlemen, is to create jobs and improve the education of the inner city. We have to make sure that young men and women stay in school, and that's why I started Learn Fair. That's why I set up a scholarship program for inner city graduates to go on to college and come back and teach in the inner city. If you have education, you have jobs, you don't need welfare, you don't need subpar housing, you're going to be able to have the best. And that's what I want, ladies and gentlemen, the best for every man, woman, and child in the inner city. And we're working on it right now, and I think we're going to be successful.
Mr. Loftus?
Well, with all due respect to the governor, these initiatives have not worked. The people of the inner city, the people of Milwaukee can ask, are they better off now than they were 4 years ago? No, the problems are worse, much worse. It requires a partnership between the governor and the mayor, not a relationship where the governor's the boss. It requires that people in the community and the city have control of the programs. It's not that the people in Madison are bad. It's that they can't possibly know what the community needs and priorities are and what works and what doesn't work. You know, President Eisenhower said that you can make a lot of progress if you don't worry about who gets the credit. And part of the problem the last 4 years has been that we're not worried about improving things, too worried about who gets the credit.
Mr. Loftus, your time is up. Mr. Thompson?
I have been in the inner city more often than probably any other governor. The Milwaukee Courier's, a minority newspaper, the first time they ever endorsed a Republican candidate for governor, endorsed me. The Housing Start program that I unveiled this week was on Wednesday. Granted, Tom Loftus, it hasn't started yet, but we've already had the first home buyer under the program. And next week we'll have more, and before the end of the year we'll have 300 new home buyers, hopefully, within the next 6 months. That's progress. And that's what I always have been about, coming up with common sense solutions to everyday problems, working with people of all walks of life, working with communities, and that's why 2,200 locally elected officials all over this state have come out and endorsed my candidacy, because they like the partnerships. They don't like the dictates from Madison under the previous administrations and other administrations. They like the way we're going right now, and we're going to continue working with every community, every city.
Your time is up, Mr. Thompson. Next question from John Scherer to Mr. Thompson.
Long as we're talking about housing programs, do you support expansion of income-driven property tax relief measures to help people in low-income areas, farmers, tourism business owners, and the like?
John, I certainly do. I've introduced 4 proposals in the legislature every year that I have been involved as governor, and the legislature's turned them down. But I think income should be part of the equalized aid formula. So poor school districts like Mercer, which you're referring to, John, will be able to get some more school aids. I also believe that a school aid package needs to have some kind of inducements to hold down on local spending, encouragement to the local school board to live within its means. You also are going to have changes in binding arbitration. You're also going to have more money for school aids, and you're also going to have to put the property tax money from the lottery right on the property tax bill where everybody voted for it and wanted it. I put that in front of the legislature, and they said no. And you're also going to make sure that no unfunded mandates. But I think income should be a factor in the equalization aid formula, because it then will allow for those property-rich districts that have poor people in them, like Mercer and other rural northern school districts, would be able to get some benefit from the school aid formula. I support that. I believe it's needed, and it certainly would be a tremendous help to small rural northern school districts that have small population but a lot of land behind their equalized aid formula.
John, repeat that question, please.
Do you support income-driven property tax relief measures?
I'm going to tell you right now, you just heard one big difference between the governor and me on the question of abortion. Here's another big difference. I have proposed a plan where we lower school property taxes by state law. They have to go down. That we make up the lost revenue by dedicating the lottery for that purpose and by shifting more of the cost to the income tax. I require educational improvements like preschool opportunities and more time in school through academic summer school, and then ask for a school report card where you can measure whether your child's school is getting better or it's getting worse. Not based on some comparison with another state or another school district, not some Lake Wobegon measurement where everybody turns out above average, but whether your kid's school is getting better. It is a fundamental change, and it will lower property taxes, but it must be done if we are going to improve education and compete in a world economy.
Mr. Thompson.
I don't think you answered the question. He was asking about an income-based formula, but you want to talk about your program. It's called TLC, ladies and gentlemen, Tax Like Crazy. It's $4.8 billion underfunded. Do you think that the state of Wisconsin can afford a 50% increase in the income taxes or a 4-cent increase on the sales tax? That's what Tom Loftus is talking about with his property tax reform package. And it doesn't in any way lower property taxes. all it does is increase a lot of other taxes. I don't think that's fair. I think it's being hypocritical to the poor people of the state of Wisconsin that want property taxes to put out a dream and then say, hey, we're going to end up paying a lot more in taxes. That's what Tommy Thompson's about. Tommy Thompson is here to deliver tax reductions.
Mr. Loftus.
Well, with all due respect to the governor, and let me grant him his point about my plan. You know, I didn't say what I would do in the 1995 budget. I'm not so sure I'll get reelected in 1994. But let's talk about my plan for the 4 years that I'll be governor. It's fair, it's funded, and it will reduce school property taxes by 15% in that 4th year. The state pays 55% of school costs rather than the current 46%. I invite you to examine this idea. It's revolutionary, but we cannot make progress if we have the property tax hold us and our children hostage.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes, Jim.
Follow up, if we can. You talked about binding arbitration. Now, if binding arbitration for teachers is dumped or significantly altered, isn't the alternative likely to be the right to strike? And is that a good trade-off in exchange for lower taxes?
On a follow-up question, 30 seconds for each candidate.
What was that?
On a follow-up question, 30 seconds for each candidate.
Would you repeat the question then?
I'm sorry.
Do you think
You
that...
interrupted. I don't know if you wanted.
Okay.
All right.
If there are significant changes in binding arbitration or it's dumped, the alternative is likely to be the right to strike. Is that a good trade-off to lower taxes?
If anybody is serious about property tax relief in this state, they're going to have to modify binding arbitration. You don't have to repeal it. My plan is that if the school board offers a cost of living increase, then you don't have the teachers union being able to ask for a unilateral arbitrator from Madison or from someplace outside the district to make that decision. That's what's driving property taxes in this state. And if anybody is serious about it, like I am, I'm willing to stand up to the teachers union. I understand why Tom Loftus isn't, because he gets all of his financial support from the teachers union. But if you're really serious about property tax relief, you will do something about binding arbitration. And as a result, as a question as to whether or not it affects strikes, no, you don't have to. State employees, all the state employees have to negotiate between the employer and the employee. And they don't have the right to strike, and they don't have binding arbitration. So you can have both. But what we really need is some sort of courage in the legislature that's willing to stand up and say, we really want to be serious about property taxes, ladies and gentlemen. We want to do something about the runaway spending at the local level.
Mr. Thompson, your time is up.
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Well, I support the current collective bargaining law. The choice is strikes by public employees or binding arbitration at the local level. We've decided on binding arbitration. And the governor's plan where he freezes and caps teachers' salary, I think would be a disaster. What young student wants to become a teacher if the state is going to say it's a profession where you can only get paid so much? Teachers do miracle things. When my son came home from first grade and he could read, it was a miracle to me. I went to the parent-teacher conference on Wednesday night, found out my 9-year-old could work a keyboard of a computer. These things are miracles to me, and we want the best and brightest to go into teaching. I appreciate the support of teachers. I'd hate to run in an election where teachers didn't support me. Mrs. Twaddell, I enjoy your support. That's my son's teacher.
Mr. Loftus? Yeah, I'm sorry, your time is up. The next question by Patty Lowe to Mr. Loftus.
Mr. Loftus, a recent UW survey indicates that many family farmers and an overwhelming number of consumers are concerned about BGH, bovine growth hormone. As governor, would you support a continued moratorium on BGH, and would you support labeling laws that would tell consumers whether BGH is in their milk?
I would support a moratorium that goes 6 months or a year after FDA approval of BGH. Now, BGH is something that does nothing to make milk more pure or more wholesome. The two things that we advertise milk on. It does nothing to increase consumer confidence in milk, and that's a very touchy thing to play with. I represent about 1,000 farmers. I care about them, and this is scary stuff. Now, it's probably coming, but I say the legislature should get another chance to see if the people of this state want labeling or some other proposal. I propose that people be able to label milk and dairy products as BGH free, and that the state put a seal of approval on that, so those farmers that didn't want to use BGH would have some edge in the marketplace. At least they wouldn't be swamped. We should not do anything in haste to hurt Wisconsin's family farmers.
Mr. Thompson, would you favor a continued moratorium and/or labeling laws regarding BGH?
Patty, I signed the one into law right now, the one that is going to go through next April. And I think it's only fair that we take a look and wait and see what the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, is making a determination, first off, if it's healthy, whether or not it's going to harm the cattle, whether or not it's going to be able to be sold in the United States. And I think we have to find out what sort of health risks there are involved. If the FDA comes back and says that it's safe, then I don't think Wisconsin can be an island. Because 85% of our dairy products are sold outside the state of Wisconsin. And I don't think anybody wants to put our dairy farmers in a disadvantage with other states. If Wisconsin dairy farmers are not going to be able to compete on a level playing field, then I think Wisconsin is going to be dramatically hurt economically. And our agricultural interests are going to be hurt. Therefore, unless the United States, unless the FDA says that it's going to be prohibited, I don't think Wisconsin can be an island unto itself, and I would not support that. I don't think the farmers want that. I think what the farmers want to make sure is that it is safe and that the milk that is going to be produced from cattle in Wisconsin can be sold in the national market as well as the international market and be able to expand the sales necessary to make agriculture the tremendous leader that we have in the state right now. We want to maintain that leadership. We don't want it to fall behind.
Well, BGH is an important issue, but consider the plight of Wisconsin farmers on the property tax. Do you know that property taxes in Wisconsin are 4 times higher on a farm than they are in Minnesota? 3 times higher on a house, an average house, than they are in Minnesota. You talk about putting farmers at a competitive disadvantage. Just think of the efficiency that they have to achieve and the cost cutting that they have to undertake just to make up for what the Minnesota farmer gets as a break in property taxes. My property tax plan moves us toward the Minnesota plan, and that is the best thing we can do for family farmers in this state.
Well, Tommy Thompson's already one step ahead of you, Tom, because I already put into a proposal that's going to reduce the agricultural property taxes on agricultural land by 14% this year. We're going to have an automatic reduction in agricultural farm property taxes across the board. And I put one in that would have included the improvements. But you wouldn't take it up, Tom. What do you say to the farmers about that? What do you say about the fact that you had a chance to improve the property tax relief programs for farmers, and you just said no? You shrugged your shoulders and wouldn't even debate it. We've already done it, Tom. We're a step ahead of you, once again.
Next question from Mr. Iverson for Mr. Thompson.
Maybe we could just stay with this tax question a moment longer, since a recent survey shows that it's the #1 issue to people of our state. Governor, you've blamed the legislature for not doing more on property tax relief. Mr. Speaker, you've suggested that the governor hasn't offered much leadership. I'd like to at least settle, if we could, this little business of what to do with lottery proceeds.
Sure.
So I'd like to read you a question that actually came to me from a woman in La Crosse, and she wrote this: "We are absolutely fed up with the political games played by our government, the governor and the legislature. Why has neither candidate seen to it that lottery proceeds be used to decrease property taxes?" Governor?
The lottery proceeds right now are going into education. But this last year, on the special session proposal that I called the legislature into special session, I introduced a piece of legislation. And just like everybody out there that's watching tonight and everybody in this audience, when the lottery was voted on, People voted to put the lottery proceeds right on the bottom of their property tax bill. Isn't that what everybody wanted? I know that's what I want. That's what I put the bill in front of the legislature, and the legislature said no. I think, Dave, if you want to ask the question, I wish you'd go around and take a poll like I did all over the state of Wisconsin, and people have told me time and time again, the lottery money should be right on the bottom of the property tax bill as a credit, so every man and woman that owns real estate in the state of Wisconsin will be able to see once and for all where that money is going. They don't trust Madison, they don't trust their county government on this question. But once they see the lottery proceeds being on the bottom of the property tax bill, I think then they will have the kind of insurance that they've all wanted and what they really were expecting when they voted on the lottery. And I'm hopeful that the legislature next year will take up my provision and put the money where it belongs on the property tax bill as a credit.
Well, the Quakers have a phrase that's called talking truth to power. The governor's got the power, the governor's got the TV ads. But you know, his property tax plan was defeated by the legislature. I led the fight to defeat his property tax plan. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad the Democratic Party did it. Because that plan was financed by a sales tax on home heating fuel, by a sales tax on small business rents, by a sales tax on sewer charges. It would have been the death knell for senior citizens on fixed incomes. And just think, if we had gone along with the governor's proposal to put the sales tax on home heating bills, and the Middle East crisis that we're having now occurred, and you know those prices are going to go up. That wasn't a plan worthy of support. That's the plan the governor talks about the legislature defeating. Now the lottery. Well, you know we've got a successful lottery because you see those dancing cows on TV advertising. Governor's been the governor for 4 years. The whole time the lottery's been in place. It's not providing property tax relief, and quite frankly, the legislature enacted what the governor wanted to do with the lottery. My proposal is, lottery is dedicated to school property taxes. They have to go down, quid pro quo.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes, you adjourned the legislature when we were discussing property tax relief. My property tax bill would have cut property taxes across the state of Wisconsin by 15%. And Tom Loftus said, I got to adjourn the legislature. We can't take this up. We can't pass a property tax bill. I got to go out and campaign for Michael Dukakis. That was his answer the next day when he adjourned the legislature abruptly. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you would appreciate a 15% reduction on your property tax bill, and that's what it would have been if the legislature would have adopted the Tommy Thompson reform package on property taxes.
Well, again, with all due respect to the governor, I do not think that the people of this state wanted a property tax plan that was financed by putting the sales tax on your home heating bills, or a sales tax on the rent that you pay if you're in small business, or the sales tax on your sewer bill at home. Those were regressive, unfair, counterproductive taxes. That wasn't property tax relief. That was an assault on people who don't have the money now to pay their heating bills.
Mr. Chair, the next question for Mr. Loftus.
Political candidates in the Attorney General's race in the 12th State Senate District, for instance, are calling for new negotiations to settle the issue of Chippewa treaty rights. Do you think a settlement or revision of the treaties is a better idea than trying to work within the treaties?
I favor co-management. As a Speaker of the Assembly, what you do is you get there earlier than other people, you stay there later, and you try to get reasonable people to agree. Many times you're trying to get unreasonable people to agree. That's my job, and I've been good at it. There is a consensus in northern Wisconsin. It needs to be found through leadership. I favor co-management. In its simplest terms, it's a separate set of hunting and fishing regulations and resource management programs for the treaty lands. I approach it in a conservation sense, preserving and enhancing the resource for all. This is what they've done in the state of Washington. It's the model that I would use. And I think Senator Inouye has a great role to play in Wisconsin. He can be a help. He was very helpful in the state of Washington. Now, if you elect me governor, I am going to move as quickly as possible toward negotiating a co-management agreement and getting these people throughout the state together so we can make progress. 4 springs of turmoil is 4 too many.
Governor, do you believe that revision of the treaties is a better idea than trying to work within the framework of the treaties?
We have done so much to mitigate the kind of confrontations that we've seen on the landings. We were able to keep the North so that there would not be the kind of violence that a lot of people had expected. We were able to allow the Indians to continue the spearing without any really incidents this past spring. We're starting to cooperate in many areas. I passed an executive order in which now we set up Indian tribal local agreements so that tribal members and non-tribal members in 6 different areas of the state in northern Wisconsin can sit down and work out their differences, understand each other. We also increased the amount of money for education in northern Wisconsin, for tourism promotion, to expand it. We also are expanding the fisheries in northern Wisconsin so that we will be able to stock more fish. An 85% increase in walleyes, a 75% increase in muskies. But co-management, Tom, is just unconstitutional. The Constitution of the state of Wisconsin says that the public trust doctrine says that the Department of Natural Resources is responsible for managing the resources in northern Wisconsin. You cannot delegate that. It's unconstitutional. I believe in cooperation, and we're finding that cooperation is in fact working in northern Wisconsin. And I was happy to see that the Wisconsin State Journal did a story this past Sunday that said that things have improved a great deal in the past year. And we're going to continue to work on it till we can completely solve this very serious problem completely in northern Wisconsin.
Mr. Loftus, your rebuttal.
Well, let me answer the question again. I favor co-management. That's where I would lead this state. It's not unconstitutional. You can't find any great differences between the Constitution of the state of Washington and the state of Wisconsin. It's a simple concept. You get together and you agree on the rules on the treaty lands. It takes leadership. The estimation or the judgment of success can no longer be that there is no violence at the landings. We have to move on.
Mr. Thompson, your rebuttal.
Your great leadership, Tom, was when you were chairman of the Indian Study Affairs Committee 2 years ago, before the spring season started, you quit. You ran. You didn't want to have to come up with any kind of difficult decisions. You resigned your committee chairmanship because you were afraid of the controversy. I've been in northern Wisconsin. I've been on the landings. I've been on the reservations. I've been in northern Wisconsin communities. I've talked to all sides, and I continue to do that. Every spring I'm up there, plus many other times, talking to people, trying to work things together. And you know something? It's working. The racism has been reduced. People are working together, and they're going to be able to continue to work together under the next Thompson administration.
Next question, Patty Lowe to Mr. Thompson.
Mr. Thompson, continuing in this vein, at least 2 bands of Chippewa have either blocked or attempted to block mining efforts in northern Wisconsin based on their property interests in the ceded territory. Mm-hmm. What are your views on the creation of a mining district in northern Wisconsin?
I believe that if mining can be environmentally sound, that we should do it. Mining is like any other resources. And we have got the toughest mining law in the United States right now. It was passed in 1977. Both Tom Loftus and Tommy Thompson in the legislature voted for it. And right now, It's going through the review process by the Department of Natural Resources, the way the law expected it to. And if the mining is feasible and if it's environmentally responsible, why not allow northern Wisconsin to be able to have new jobs and be able to create a new industry? I think it would be a terrible mistake just to say have a moratorium on mining, any type of mining in northern Wisconsin, whether or not it could be compatible with the environment. And that's what the law was set up to do. You have to prove first, before you have any type of mining, that it's environmentally sound. And so I ask you and I ask everybody, if a mining company comes into Wisconsin and can prove that it's environmentally sound and it's going to create jobs and improve the economy in northern Wisconsin, I say to them, and the DNR makes that determination, not me, nobody else but the DNR, I think then we should allow it. And I think most of the people in northern Wisconsin support that position, and I think most of the people in Wisconsin support that position.
Mr. Loftus, your views on a mining district in northern Wisconsin?
I have proposed three things in regards to mining. One, that we have a law to prohibit mining on state-owned lands and state parks. If someone wants to mine in a state park, the legislature should have to pass a law to approve it. It shouldn't be left up to the DNR. I've also proposed a moratorium on mining in northern Wisconsin. To do it so we can have a cooling off period, a breather for environmental and economic reasons. The 1977 law, which I was an author of, never envisioned whole-scale, large-scale mining in northern Wisconsin, open pit mining close to groundwater and surface water. The recreational-based economy of northern Wisconsin is something to be careful of, because, you know, big business came through northern Wisconsin one other time in our history, and we weren't watchful. Kennecott and Exxon, they've got their bottom line as their interest. It's only the elected people of Wisconsin that can have the people's interest as their bottom line. And I say it's little to ask before we plunge ahead that we take a breather and see if our laws are indeed adequate.
Mr. Thompson, your rebuttal.
The law is that if it's environmentally sound, and if the local community votes for it, and the Department of Natural Resources, after a hearing by citizens and other individuals who have an interest in it, make a determination that mining is feasible and that the environment will not be in any way harmed, I say to you, Tom, and to the people of northern Wisconsin who want this, why can't we go ahead and create the jobs for the people up there? Why can't we allow mining to continue? I know it's easy to beat up on businesses. You've been noted for that for the last 20 years. I think it's about time that people understand that business is good, they create the jobs, and make sure that the social programs are important, but they also have the funding necessary to complete them.
Mr. Loftus, your rebuttal.
Believe me, it's difficult to beat up on Exxon and Kennecott. It's difficult. 80 local units of government in northern Wisconsin have passed mining moratoriums. With all due respect to the governor, it's not clear what the people of northern Wisconsin want. It's certainly clear that where the moratoriums have passed has been where the mines have been proposed. There's also another law I want to change, and that's one that gives more local control to communities. The scales are tipped in the favor of the mining companies right now, and we should balance those scales before we force this on people.
That will end the opportunity for questions during this debate. We'll now move into the closing statement portion of the debate. Mr. Loftus, you have 1.5 minutes for a closing statement.
Well, when I started this campaign, I knew I was the underdog. But I feel that people agree with my ideas on education, property taxes, and the environment. And as people got to know me and know about my ideas, they would come to support me. I hope some of that has happened in this hour. But there is an issue that has eclipsed other issues, overshadowed them, and that's the role of money in this campaign. I came into the legislature on the heels of Watergate. That first session was devoted to open records and open government and clean government. We passed the state's campaign finance law. Well, the governor becomes the first candidate in history to reject the law's spending limits. He says he's going to raise $5 or $6 million. Well, now the question becomes, who will decide? Who will control state government? Will it be the money, or will it be the people? If I'm elected, the people of Wisconsin will know that answer, because I am on your side. Thank you.
Mr. Thompson, 1.5 minutes for a closing statement.
Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen, for allowing us to come into your living rooms this evening. Thank you so very much for allowing me to be your governor. The last 4 years, as I've indicated, have been probably the strongest and most promising 4 years ever in the history of the state. We've been able to improve the environment, education, economically, and enforcement of laws. And more people in all walks of life are coming out and supporting my candidacy because they like that kind of up feeling, the optimistic feeling that Wisconsin's on the move. Isn't it much nicer to see the Kiplinger report say Wisconsin's a leader, Newsweek saying Wisconsin's a leader, Fortune magazine saying Wisconsin's a leader, than having those individuals put ads in the paper telling businesses don't come to Wisconsin because Wisconsin's an anti-business state? But it's not only about improving the conditions as far as business is concerned. It's also helping poor people help themselves through welfare reform. Under the Thompson administration, we've been able to help reduce the welfare caseload by over 19%. 61,000 less people on welfare today than when I started 4 years ago. There's an individual by the name of Cindy Spencer who was on welfare, who's now back in school because of Learn Fair. And she says, because of Learn Fair, I'm hitting the books and getting A's. And she said, I want to go on and become a public defender. That's what it's all about, ladies and gentlemen. Having the spirit and the vision that Wisconsin can be stronger and better tomorrow. I believe the decade of the 90s is the best decade we're ever going to have in this state. And I believe under the Thompson administration, we're going to continue to grow and prosper and be stronger and better tomorrow in education, economically, enforcement, and the environment. I think that's what you want. That's what I want. Let's do it together.
That concludes the debate between gubernatorial candidates Tom Loftus and Tommy Thompson. This debate has been hosted by the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association through a grant to its educational and research arm, the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association Foundation. We thank the candidates, Tommy Thompson and Tom Loftus, for their participation, and we thank our panelists, Dave Iverson, Wisconsin Public Television, Patty Lowe, WKOW-TV Madison, and John Scherer, WMYM-AM and WWMH-FM Minocqua. We'd also like to thank Milwaukee Public Television for their production assistance and the technical facilities. Over 90 Wisconsin radio and television stations have broadcast this debate to ensure that every citizen of Wisconsin has had an opportunity to hear and see the two major candidates for governor in 1990. They hope that bringing this political event to you as a public service will contribute positively to this campaign. On behalf of Wisconsin's radio and television broadcasters and candidates Tom Loftus and Tommy Thompson, thank you for listening and watching.
A Leader for the 90s has been underwritten by the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association Foundation, hosted by the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association. Panelists included Dave Iverson of Wisconsin Public Television, Patty Lowe of WKOW-TV, and John Scherer of WMYM-AM WWMH-FM. Transmission facilities contributed by Hughes Television Network. The satellite coordinator was Bob Furlong of WCGV-TV. Promotional assistance provided by WKOW-TV. Special thanks to Wayne Barnett of WTMJ-TV and Milwaukee Public Television and its crew.
Get him.